Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this webinar. It is right at 3 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are joining us live, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. And for everyone joining us via the recording, we are also grateful that you are taking the time to watch this webinar about back to school resources. This is part two. As you can see, I hope that you all were able to join us for part one. However, if you have not, that is totally okay. We're talking about different topics, and so you can catch part one at another time if you would prefer. We're just happy that you are here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I think that most of you know me, but I am Sarah Kirk. I'm the school counselor specialist here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and I love all things comprehensive school counseling. So this webinar series is a delight for me to bring to you all as we continue to work in Oklahoma to implement comprehensive school counseling statewide. If you've joined me for many of my webinars, you know I always like to do a quick welcoming and inclusion activity. And today's is just a quick check-in about how you're feeling. So take a look at those different little puppy dogs in the image and share with us. Amy has a quick one. I like that one. Thank you for sharing. Tracy, number 7. Tracy and Amy might be able to get along. Gail, of course. You have that grin on your face right now. I can see it. I love it. Dixie's sticking her head in the sand. Another 7. All right, we've just got a wide range of puppy dogs with us this afternoon. I completely understand. I think right now I'm feeling like a 6, but earlier today I was a little bit more like, who was it that said? Amy, who said she was a 1. I was like that earlier today. So we kind of come and go, right? But thank you for sharing with us. Hopefully, if you're one of those more terrified or stressed out dogs, this hour leaves you feeling a little calmer. As always, I like to do these welcoming and inclusion activities to give us a chance to take a deep breath and to reflect on our day, but also to model something you could do in your classroom lessons. I've used this exact one with students of all ages before, and they typically really like it. I've also used it with staff members before, and it's also a hit. So feel free to copy it and use it in your work if you'd like. You'll also see there in that blue box the 3 signature practices. These come from Castle, and they include the idea that our lessons are more engaging when we include these 3 signature practices: welcoming and inclusion activities, engaging strategies, brain breaks, and transitions, and then closing with an optimistic closure. So I always do my best to model that in my presentations as well. So you'll see that as we go through our time together. All right, so like we said, you are joining us for this summer series, webinar series on back to school resources. Last week, we came together and talked about calendars in our first part of this summer series. We talked about the annual and weekly calendar and how you can use that to strengthen your comprehensive school counseling program. And today we're going to be focusing on student outcome goals. So we are going to talk all things outcome goals. It's the perfect time of the year to start wrapping your mind around these outcome goals, which is why I wanted to be sure and cover it in this back to school resources series. Next week, we're going to be talking about the annual administrative conference, which is another component of comprehensive school counseling that is perfectly aligned with the September-October month. So we hope you'll join us for that last session of this 3-part series next Thursday. So like I said, last week we covered that annual calendar and weekly calendar. I hope that those of you who were able to join us are in the process of getting those components implemented and started in your school. Just as a reminder, I am more than willing to take a look at your annual or weekly calendar if you want some feedback on it. I got a couple of people take me up on that offer last week, and I am always more than willing to take a look at those if that would be helpful. And again, if you missed that session, that is recorded. I'll send a recap email today after our session, might be tomorrow, but I'll send it soon. And I'll include both the recording to this webinar and last week's in case you missed our webinar on the calendars. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into what we're going to be talking about today. So like I said, today is all about annual student outcome goals. I think this is one of the most important things we can do in comprehensive school counseling. So I want to make sure that we spend a good amount of time really diving deep into these. Now, I also know they can be a little intimidating and a little overwhelming. So please stop me as I go through this presentation today. I can see the chat. So put your questions, your comments, your thoughts or concerns in there, and I am happy to walk through those concerns or questions with you all. But we will start today by making sure we understand where this fits into our Oklahoma comprehensive school counseling framework. I like to make sure you all are grasping the bigger picture of our framework and how these different pieces fit inside of that. So we'll cover that. Then we'll jump into what the annual student outcome goals look like and how we can write them. We'll take a look at the annual student outcome goal plan, which is a template that just goes along with these student outcome goals. We'll end today giving you an update on some upcoming trainings and events and how to learn more if you are interested. Just a little heads up, I don't anticipate going too far over time, but I do want to include all of the important information. So if you have to slip out at 4, I completely understand. You can catch the rest in the recording, but I am going to go on until I finish so that we get all of the content that we need today. So a quick update before I jump into where this fits into the Oklahoma Comprehensive School Counseling Framework. Most of you all know before we started this summer series, I sent out a pre-test and we had 117 school counselors complete that pre-test. And I just always like to give you a little bit of information about what was shared there so that you know we're using that data to really drive our decision making, just like we want you all to use data to drive your decision making. So when I asked you all about your use of annual student outcome goals right now, I first asked if you know what they are, and 67% of you said yes, you do know what annual student outcome goals are. 33% of you do not know what annual student outcome goals are. So if that's you, you're in the right place. We're going to be talking all about it today. The second question asked if you think that these are important to comprehensive school counseling programs. Do you think having annual student outcome goals is important? 85% of you said yes, and 15% said maybe. Like I told you last week, I'm here to convince that 15% that these are important, but you can see there overwhelmingly, we do see these as important. However, when I asked if you currently have annual student outcome goals, 76% said no. So if you are coming to us today, never having annual student outcome goals in the past, you are in great company because 76% of our friends of the 117 school counselors do not currently have these. So for me, this was a really, really strong indication that this is what we need more training on. And we'll continue to have these conversations until we flip that number and that number aligns with how many of you feel that this is important and feel that this needs to be a big part of our program. So that was great data for me to see that, yes, you all see these as important. Some of you even already know what they are, but there's a real disconnect in the implementation piece. And so if these are something you don't currently have, that is why we're here and why we're training on this. For those of you that were in the 24% that do currently have annual student outcome goals, I still think this training will have some great information for you to make sure that you have really strong annual student outcome goals. I know I'm going to give an example later on of an annual student outcome goal that I had that I learned down the road wasn't a very good one. And so that happens as well. So this training will have a little bit for everyone. But again, like I said at the beginning, this isn't meant to be overwhelming because we're all in the same place and we are all in this together statewide as we work to implement the framework. I often say our framework is still a baby. It hasn't even had its first birthday yet, coming up in October, but we are still very much in the implementation phase in Oklahoma. So you are in the right spot. So let's make sure we understand where annual student outcome goals fit within our framework. So I know I show this slide frequently and it's a little overwhelming with all the words, but I like for us to see a snapshot of the framework, which is what this slide includes. It has those 4 big components bolded: define, manage, deliver, and assess. And you can see here that annual student outcome goals fit right there in the manage component. Now, you've probably heard me say before, the manage component is the most often skipped over. This is what I call the behind the scenes work, but it's often skipped over because we jump into the deliver phase where we're delivering student services, which is so important. Serving students face to face and indirectly is such a big part of what we do. But this manage component is how we make sure that that delivery is effective. It's how we make sure that we're not just providing random acts of school counseling, but that we're really providing intentional, needed supports for our students. So this manage component is so important. And that's why so many of my webinars really focus on that. I know you all know how to deliver services. You know how to spend time with kids and provide counseling or even provide lessons and things like that. What's harder is figuring out how to make sure when we're delivering it that we're delivering what's most needed, and that's in that manage component. So you can see there, calendars were also under this manage component. We talked about that last week, and that annual administrative conference is as well, because everything we're talking about in this back to school summer series is how to effectively manage our programs so that they're the most effective. And you can see here that this slide just reiterates that point that we need to have a really strong manage component so that we can effectively and efficiently manage our program, and that results in better serving our students. I often get asked if when we have really full plates as school counselors, if this part's important, because we are so busy and our plates are full. But I really, really, really recommend still prioritizing this manage component because of that effective and efficiency piece. We're going to more effectively and more efficiently serve when we do this part first. Otherwise, we're kind of spinning our wheels. I know we've all felt that way as school counselors, where we're on those hamster wheels of never able to get our head above water. We're just constantly responding to crises and things that come up. And this manage component really helps us get on top of that, to the other side of that, where we feel much more effective. So that is why these different pieces are so important. So this just includes that information in a little bit of a different way to show everything that is included in that manage component. And some of you may already have some of these pieces in place, and that is great. If you already have a vision and a mission statement, you already have pieces of this manage component. Or if you went and wrote your annual and weekly calendar, check, check, and check, you've got that going. Or if you use a lesson plan template when you deliver classroom lessons, you're already doing pieces of this. And as I always say, if this list is intimidating, if you don't have any of these things in place yet, that's okay. They're not meant to all be done at the same time. It is okay to have nothing on this list except an annual student outcome goal. That's totally fine. That's still a step in the right direction. That's still a step towards better serving our students. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can check this one off and get these annual student outcome goals as a part of your program. So let's talk about what they are. So annual student outcome goals are simply just goal statements. So it's a little bit of a fancy way to say that it's just a goal statement that we write for our school counseling program that describes how we're going to have an impact on student achievement, attendance, or discipline. Doesn't have to be all 3 of those, but it needs to be one of them. And we'll talk more and we're going to look at some examples, but keep that in mind. That's a really important piece. Sometimes I hear from school counselors that write goals that may be about something different, like maybe you want to get into classrooms twice a month. That's a great personal goal, but that's not an annual student outcome goal. An annual student outcome goal must be related to student achievement, attendance, or discipline. When we start thinking about what these annual student outcome goals are, we want them to be tied to our vision and mission. Now, if you don't have a vision or mission right now, that's okay. But if you do, think about what your vision and mission says, because we want this alignment through our school counseling program. We want to be able to show someone, look, my vision is this. This is what I see for students 20 years from now. How I'm going to get there is this mission. I've got this mission that shows how I'm going to get there. And I'm specifically going to get there through these annual student outcome goals. We want to see that consistency. And of course, we want to make sure that these annual student outcome goals are based on school data. So this part might be a little bit tricky. I'm already prepared for some of you to say you don't know what your school data is. And if that's where you are right now, that's okay. We're going to talk more about how you can get access to that data. And we talked quite a bit about that in the data summer series that we did in June, and that is recorded and you have access to, because it's really important as school counselors that you do have access to that school data for many reasons, but one of which is because you need it in order to write your student outcome goals. And the reason for that is because you don't know what is needed if you don't have your previous data. So for example, we said attendance could be one of the areas. Well, I have worked at schools that had no attendance issues. That wasn't an area of need, but I wouldn't have known that if I didn't look at school data. Now, I've also worked at a school that had severe attendance needs, but I still couldn't write an annual student outcome goal without knowing specifically what that data looked like so that I could appropriately write an attendance goal. Again, we'll talk more about this as we look at some examples, but keep those pieces in mind as we go. Now, I often get asked if your school has some sort of school improvement plan, or if your school has school-wide goals that are related to achievement, attendance, or discipline. That's very common. And so I often get asked, should you write the same goal? Is that your school goal the same thing as your annual student outcome goal? And the answer is it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So typically what happens is that a school improvement plan is broader than we want our annual student outcome goals to be. Typically, we'll see something like the school improvement plan is to decrease discipline referrals, to increase average daily attendance rates, kind of more broad. And with our annual student outcome goals, a lot of times they're more specific. And again, hang with me, I'm going to get into more detail as we go. But it is totally appropriate for them to be related. In fact, I really encourage the goals to be related. Not only does that allow your school-wide goals to be aligned with your school counseling program goals, which is a great thing, but it also can show your principals and your administrators how effective and how impactful you can be as the school counselor to help them reach the school-wide goals. So making those aligned and making sure your principals and administrators know they're aligned is a great advocacy tool. We talk a lot about how to get some of these non-school counseling duties removed. And one way to do it is to show your principal that if they have a big attendance goal, you are perfectly equipped to help them get there. And you're even going to write some annual student outcome goals to show that you are committed to helping them get there. So you can see how that alignment can really help overall just strengthen our school counseling program. So again, our annual student outcome goals, we want them to be based on school outcome data. We want it to be based on previous data so that we know where the needs are. We want them to be in those three areas: achievement, attendance, or discipline. They really help give focus to our school counseling program. However, keep in mind that everything we do in our school counseling program won't be related to these goals, and that's okay. And I'll talk more about that as we go. but that's another thing that people often get hung up on. So for example, let's go back to the attendance example. If you have an attendance related annual student outcome goal, it does not mean you're not going to work with students on their social and emotional well-being, or their college and career readiness, or their academic skills, or all the many things we do with students. It doesn't mean you're only going to be hyper focused on attendance, but it does mean that you're going to make sure your program has components to meet that goal. Also, we want them, like we said, we want them to be written and implemented at the beginning of the school year, ideally. If this is feeling overwhelming, I've had school counselors write them to start in the new year, and that's okay too. But since we're right now in September, I strongly recommend that you at least start. Now, remember, we always say don't let perfect be the enemy of good. They don't have to be the most perfect goals. You're going to learn things along the way, but let's really try to get that going now so that you can begin that improvement process. And then we want them to be written using a SMART goal template. And I'm going to show you that template here in just a minute. Most of us are familiar with the acronym of SMART goals. And this is just a template that makes it really easy to write a good SMART goal. And we'll take a look at that here in just a second. So let's dive into the actual writing of the annual student outcome goals. So like we said, ideally, previous school data is used to write the goals, and the school data summary that we've looked at before is a great tool to use. You don't have to use that tool, but it's linked there, and we talked quite a bit about it in the data summer series. If you want to, again, add another layer of implementation of our comprehensive school counseling framework. And then, like we said, we want it to be written in SMART goal format. Ideally, we have 1 to 2 annual student outcome goals. So again, keep in mind, if we only have one, which is totally okay, you can apply for RAMP recognition, which is the highest award in the school counseling world, with 1 annual student outcome goal. That is perfectly acceptable. But just keep in mind, again, that everything we do would not align with that goal if we only have 1 of them. So just reiterating that point. We will certainly do other things in our school counseling program. The reason for that is because we don't want you to get overwhelmed with trying to write 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 annual student outcome goals, even though we touch on 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 different big areas of the school. So this is just a way to make sure we're writing some goals, but without it becoming too tedious where nothing else is happening within our program. Again, just to reiterate, it needs to be related to attendance, achievement, or discipline. And we really want to describe desired outcomes. That's how it's related to that vision statement. We are truly thinking of what is the desired outcomes for our students. So that's why we want them to be really specific in those areas of attendance, achievement, or discipline, because that's what we want to see an improvement in our students. Again, it can be aligned or even the same as school-wide goals. Again, just reiterating the point, and here's a great example of that. So the school-wide goal might be to overall decrease discipline referrals from the previous school year. However, your annual student outcome goal might be something like, by December, the number of 7th grade discipline referrals for bullying will decrease by a certain amount, from a certain number of referrals to a lower number of referrals. Excuse me, I'm talking too fast. When I start coughing, that's how I know I'm talking too fast. So I'll slow down. So again, you can see there that it's a related goal to the school-wide goal, but it's not the exact same thing. So again, just reiterating that point. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. So you can see there in bold the parts that make that goal different than the school-wide goal. I'm so sorry. All right. Okay. So when we use the SMART goal format, that is just a way of making sure we write an annual student outcome goal in that acronym. Excuse me. in a specific, measurable, attainable, and results-oriented and time-bound way. So let's take a look at this template. I want to make sure, let me stop sharing for a second. I actually want to make sure you have this goal format pulled up. So I'm going to share it with you in the chat. All right. Excuse me. All right. So go ahead and pull up this PDF as we are looking at this. So we can look at it together. All right. Let's go back to where we were. Oops. All right, so if you have that pulled up, let me get my screen shared again. All right, you should be able to see at the top where the goal template is. Okay, it should look like what you see on the screen, just a little bit different because it is in a way that you can input it in the PDF document. But you can see here that this template makes it easy for you to write a SMART goal. So even if you don't know exactly all the parts of a good SMART goal, this template just spells it out for you because it forces you to add in all those components of a SMART goal. So if you have the PDF pulled up, you can type in it, you can just add things for fun. This doesn't have to be your official annual student outcome goal, but start playing with it because that will make you more familiar with it as we go. So typically when we write annual student outcome goals, our end date is May of the school year that we're currently in. Again, because we want these to start in September, ideally, and we're going to give ourselves the full school year to complete them. Now, sometimes people like writing semester goals, or if you're in certain situations where it's a 9-week goal, that's okay. It's just more work for you because then when the 9 weeks is over, you need to write another goal. So, kind of play with it and see what works for you. But the easiest way to do it is to make it a year-long goal so that you're really just writing 1 or 2 for the whole school year. So if you fill in on your PDF, May 2023, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's going to be 2023. And then that's your end date. So you've got one part filled out. Then you're going to describe the targeted student. So that's when you're going to think through, who do you want to target? And I don't want you to just make this up. You can make it up for now as we're playing with it. But this is where we want to be using our data. So we want to know what targeted group of students are in need of some sort of goal. So we'll take a look at an example here in just a minute, but then you'll see that this goal template makes it very easy for you to then say, will they increase or decrease? So if you want to decrease discipline referrals or increase attendance or increase past graduation rates or whatever it may be, you'll just add decrease or increase to that next box, and then you'll describe the specific outcome to be changed, what's related to achievement, attendance, or discipline. Then you'll say what percentage change you want to make from what your current data says to the target data. So let's take a look at an example. This is an example that I wrote that was a not very good example. I'm going to show you why in a minute, but I'm going to go over this because it's a good lesson learned. All right, so I originally wrote this goal and I said by June of 2022, all students at Happy Elementary will decrease the number of discipline referrals by 20% from what the current number was in, so this was for 2020, 2021 was my previous data. Now this was for the last year school year. So I was trying to go from 108 referrals to 86 referrals. That was the 20% change. Okay, so this was pretty easy to write, right? This did not take a whole lot this was just pretty easy. Now, I did mention that it's not the greatest goal, and let's show why. So remember, we said that ideally our annual student outcome goals are more specific than maybe our broader school-wide goals. So is all students at Happy Elementary very specific? It's not very specific. That's all of my students, right? So it doesn't give me a whole lot of information there. The other thing that's not very specific is the outcome to be changed. All I said was that I wanted discipline referrals to decrease, but that's still pretty broad. So as the school counselor, if this was my annual student outcome goal, the problem would be is that it would be really hard to plan interventions, small groups, classroom lessons, parent PD or trainings, those sorts of things, because it's so broad. I don't know which students I need to target. I don't know what type of discipline referrals are happening. You know, there's a really big difference if it's fighting versus talking in class, right? I wouldn't do the same type of intervention. And so this goal is just too broad. This is typically a goal we might see again as a school-wide goal. But as a school counselor, it would be very hard to meet this goal and to feel like I have any real control over it. So again, the idea is that the better idea is to add multiple descriptors. And that's just a fancy way of saying all those things we just said, to be more specific, to identify a more specific subset of students. So grade can be one of the descriptors, so adding in a grade level. So what I should have done, instead of saying all students at Happy Elementary, is I should have looked to see which students had the most discipline referrals. We all know that it often happens where there's certain grade levels who have more specific struggles. And so I should disaggregate my data and see which grades are really having a lot of behavior referrals. Then obviously we want to write the goal for the grade they're going to be in that school year. So if it was third graders last year, we'd write the goal for fourth graders. And then also you can get more specific about the type of discipline referrals. So not just the grade level, but maybe disaggregate the data to figure out what's going on. Why are there 108 referrals the year before? Do you have a bullying problem? Again, is it talking in class? Is it disruptive behavior in the hallway? Are they all occurring at recess? You know, all these different things that will help us to figure out what it is that we could focus on. So those multiple descriptors are really helpful and ideal as we write these annual student outcome goals. So let's take a look at a much better example of an annual student outcome goal. So now I've decided that by June of 2022, fifth graders with fighting and aggression discipline referrals, because I looked and in fourth grade, there was a lot of fighting and aggression with these students, will decrease the number of fighting and aggression discipline referrals, right? Because I want to focus in on that by 40% from 15 to 9 or less. So my numbers changed because when I looked, there were actually 15 fighting and aggression discipline referrals, right? So I wouldn't put the number of all the discipline referrals because I'm specifically focusing on a certain thing. Now, can you see how, as a school counselor, with this goal, are your wheels turning about what interventions you could put in place, what you could do, what small groups you could run, what classroom lessons you could do, how you could get caregiver support in this area, what PD you could do with teachers that could help with this, right? We start thinking of all the things we could do as school counselors because we have a really specific problem. And so now we can get some really specific solutions. So like I said, it does not mean I know I've said this 3 times, I think already, but because when we write our goals with multiple descriptors, then that's when people start getting a little weird about, but I don't want to only address those those fifth graders that had fighting and aggression. I want to serve all students. That's my job as a comprehensive school counselor. It totally is. That's okay. It doesn't mean the only thing you're going to do is address those fifth graders, right? But that's what your student outcome goal is going to address, right? So I think the reason why this was an example I did during a training, and the reason I wrote that example is because I was known to write goals like this when I was a school counselor, because it was really hard for me to say I was only going to do this thing. I didn't want it to be perceived that way. But what I really did is I just made it too broad and too ineffective, and it wasn't very helpful. Okay. So instead, what we should do is write goals like this and then still serve all students in the many, many ways we do. Or we could also write another goal that addresses a different subset of students, if that makes us feel better as well. So I certainly get if you're having the feeling of, but I want to serve all, because I was that person too. But no, you still are, even with this more specific annual student outcome goal. All right, so let's look at a couple of other examples. An achievement goal example. I know often our principals and administrators would prefer for us to focus on achievement goals, and that's great too. There are some really great specific achievement goals we can write. So here is an example of one. To be more for our secondary school counselors, but it could be adapted for elementary as well. But this says by December, and this was a semester one, and this was specifically a semester one because they wanted to address students who were taking Algebra 1 in the fall. Okay, so if that's a need, if that's what you want to do, totally can. So this is addressing students who were earning Fs in Algebra 1. Okay, so you can see here that it's really specific, but it's still really focusing on a need in the school. So a larger school-wide goal might have been something like to decrease the number of students earning Fs school-wide, right? And then we just got a little more specific for our annual student outcome goal. Attendance, same thing. Often our schools have overarching attendance goals, but this one really targets students who had 10 to 16 absences during the previous year. So you're really targeting a subset of students. Another way you could do this is target a students with specific number of tardies. We've done that before. But somehow making sure that it's more honed in on a specific subset of students. And then discipline, we've looked at a couple, but here's another discipline referral example. This one's specifically peer-on-peer conflict. So again, you can see how the more specific goal allows you to really brainstorm ways to meet the needs of those students. All right, so I already had you open this and get it going. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes just to practice a little bit. So if you haven't already started typing in to the link that I put in the chat, and I'll put it in the chat one more time in case anyone missed it, but go ahead, download it, play with it. If you already know some of your student data, write real stuff in there. And if you want to share with the group an idea you have for an annual student outcome goal, you can. But I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. I'm going to be quiet and let you just play with it for just a second. All right. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to play with that PDF and start thinking through what an annual student outcome goal might be for you for this year. Like I said, if you want to put it in the chat, we're happy to take a look at it. Or like I said, you are always open. I'm always open for you sharing it with me, and I can give you feedback as well. And speaking of sharing, it's really important that we don't write these annual student outcome goals and then keep them on a Google Doc or a PDF and on our computer and not share them with anyone. We want to make sure we're sharing these out with people because that's the whole point of them. So if you have a website, writing your annual student outcome goal on your website or creating a little infographic or including it in a brief slideshow, maybe that you share at a staff meeting or some sort of parent meeting. I know I always shared my annual student outcome goals at a PTA meeting at the beginning of the year. It was just a good way for me to be able to talk about the work that I was doing and some of the things that I was addressing. You can create like a quick one-page handout of some sort talking about your goal and maybe some of the things you're doing to address it. It can, like I said, you can do some sort of report to administrators and other school board members or other stakeholders. I think it's really important, again, to show that we are aligned with these school and district goals. That is advocacy work. That is how we get testing and other non-school counseling duties removed. I often say we cannot advocate for non-counseling duties to be removed if we're not showing what we are doing. And annual student outcome goals are speaking our administrators' language, speaking our district leaders' language in a way that we can really show how impactful we are. During your evaluations, if you have an annual student outcome goal, make sure that that is talked about during your yearly or quarterly evaluations. Your principal needs to be aware of that and needs to know what you're doing to address it. We're going to talk next about what you do once you have these goals, how you put a plan in place to meet them. But it is so powerful if when your evaluation comes up, if your principal is watching a lesson or observing a small group and you can show them how it's connected to your outcome goals, that is huge. That is such an advocacy tool and such a way to show how effective and impactful we can be. And if your school has a school data team or an MTSS team or a PBIS team or any of those things that kind of are aligned with these ideas, make sure they know too, right? We don't want our attendance team that we have at our school to not know that we have an attendance goal set for our school, right? That is working harder and not smarter. So we really want to make sure we're sharing this information with everyone who needs to know it, and everyone who can benefit from knowing it. And again, I cannot tell you how many times someone said, I didn't know a school counselor did that when I would share information about my goals, because they often think that we're the sing-songy, sit in our office all day kind of thing. And that is not what we are. We're so much more than that. And these annual student outcome goals can really validate that. Kim, thanks for your comment in the chat. I appreciate it so much. That's so great. All right, so let's go on. Like I said, if you want feedback, please send it my way, and I am more than happy to give you feedback on the goals that you are putting together. All right, so next we're going to look at the rest of this annual student outcome goal plan. So hopefully you still have that document up that we played with in earlier, because you might notice that it's not just that section where we write the SMART goal. That's a big part of it, and that's what a big part of our training today is about. But I do want to spend time talking about the rest of this goal plan, because the rest of this goal plan really helps us to now get the ball rolling on what we're going to do to address these goals. Again, good goals are really important, but if we don't do anything to try to meet the goals, well, they don't always get met, right? We have to be intentional about what we do to address our goals. So keep that template up. If you don't have it up or you closed it out, I'll put it in the link one more time. Kim gave a great example of her annual student outcome goal. Thank you, Kim, for sharing. We always love to hear from you. All right, so if you don't have that pulled up, go ahead and pull it up. Now, I think this whole document is one of the most important ones that we do. It's a 3-page document and it includes really vital information. However, I don't want you to get overwhelmed by the whole document and say, I can't do any of it. So I'm giving you an accommodation here if you'd like one. And that accommodation is that if you're overwhelmed by all 3 pages, please highlight or put a circle around or make a note to do page 1 and then the last section of page 3. All right. And if that's all you can do for this moment, that's great. Don't trash it all because it's overwhelming. All right. So there's my accommodation. But if you feel confident that you don't need an accommodation or you at least want to give it a shot without an accommodation, that's even better because all 3 of these pages are important. And I don't give this accommodation because the others aren't important. I just want you to take baby steps if that is needed. All right, so let's talk about the rest of page 1. So we already talked about the SMART goal part where you write in all of your things needed for the SMART goal. So hopefully that part is clear. And then underneath that, if you have yours pulled up, you'll see the second half of page 1 includes the supplemental data. And this is really important. And I didn't quite realize how important this was until I started gathering it. It really took like boots on the ground work for me to see why this was such an important piece of this. So what this supplemental data is it's just more of that informal data that gives us really rich information. So essentially what we do here is we just summarize some of the insights and comments that we hear from other important stakeholders about things that are related to the goal. So let's go back to the goal that I wrote that was about bullying, decreasing discipline referrals that were related to fighting and aggression, right? Remember, I wrote that for 5th grade students. So I know that they had a lot of fighting and aggression, but maybe that's all I know. Maybe I'm new to the school, or maybe I wasn't real aware of what was going on, but now I want to address the goal. Well, you can imagine there's a lot of important information that might be supplemental data beyond just the hard numbers of how many discipline referrals there were and what grade they're in. And that's where we get to really use this data. So if there are other school counselors, or if you as the school counselor know a little bit about this, then you can first write some of the things you report. So if I've been a school counselor at this school and I know that in 4th grade, there was a really big lack of strong classroom management and it led to some disruptive classrooms and often these fights were occurring in those moments, I might write that down. Or if I knew that there were a group of 3 students who really didn't get along and they were all in the same class in 4th grade, I would write that down here, right? Because you can already start imagining, I see Gail smiling at me because she's already thinking she's going to make a referral or make sure she talks to that principal about putting those students in a different class in 5th grade, right? So there's things we can do with this supplemental data that's going to help right away to address our goal. So again, this is just real informal. You can do it in bullet points. You can just do it in just little jotting of information. Doesn't have to be formal. School counselors report issue in 4th grade classroom. Gail, Charles, and Gary should be in different classes next year, okay, or something like that. And same with each of these group of stakeholders. So what are the 4th grade teachers saying about this group? What are we hearing cause some of these difficulties? What even, 3rd grade teachers, was there an issue then? Kind of going back, getting that more historical data. Administrators, if there were that many discipline referrals for fighting, most likely the principals and administrators were really involved. What reactions to the fighting worked? Did suspending the students decrease it at all? Was there ever restorative conversations? What did the administrators do and what do they report? Parents, we forget to ask our parents what they're seeing. Are the students having these difficulties at home? Do they live next door to some of the students that they're fighting with? Are they spending too much time together? What do we hear from our parents and caregivers? Our students, what are they saying is happening? How are they contributing to this, or what do they feel some of the reasons for these issues are? And then if there's any other stakeholders, make sure and gather their thoughts there too. So you can see here, this is pretty easy to gather, but really, really important. If we want to work smarter and not harder, this can give us such great information. So I'm looking at Kimberly's question, or Kimberly's goal that she put in the chat for us. So she focused on uncooperative and not following directions. So I hope that she was able to gather some of this supplemental data, because I bet she was able to learn a lot from the teachers about why they were having these big issues with not following directions. Kimberly also might have found out that professional development about classroom management was really needed, and she could make that recommendation. And there's just all these other things as we peel back these layers that we could find out. All right, so that really covers the first page. And remember, if you want the accommodation, you just have to complete that first page, and then we're going to look at one more section on page 3 I'd like for you to do. But that's pretty easy, right? We write that goal using the fill in the blank format, and then we gather the supplemental data. And again, if maybe I know there's turnover of teachers and things like that, or maybe you can't contact parents right away, it's okay to leave some of these sections blank. You can always add to it as you gather it. Again, start somewhere. That's the important piece here. All right. So I think I went over all this, but just to again reiterate, this really gives context. There's no need to make this a formal thing. You don't need to send a survey or anything like that. If you do have survey data that's related, I know some of you use different types of school-wide surveys. You could definitely add that there, but don't feel like you have to do it just because it's needed on this document. But I think it even says, let's go back. Yeah, it even says if you have like school climate surveys that that you already use, you can certainly add that here. But don't feel like you have to make a survey for this. This is meant to be informal, just to get that diverse array of people's feedback. And then you could just summarize it, and that will help you as you continue to think through how you're going to reach this goal. All right, so this is the other section. This is actually on page 3. So if you want to scroll to the PDF, the bottom of page 3. So for my accommodation learners out there, this is the other part I really want you to complete, because this is where you start thinking about what you're going to do to meet the goal, okay? And they have it broken up into direct student services and indirect student services, because both are really, really important. So some of the things that you might include in the direct student services, if we're back to thinking about my 5th grade students who had discipline referrals for aggression and fighting, the number one thing I'm going to probably do is a direct student service as a small group that addresses aggression and effective ways to manage big feelings or something like that. So that's a direct student service I would write in there. I might also do some classroom lessons on conflict resolution, because everyone can benefit from that. But if we kind of start off the year really talking about how we can appropriately manage our conflicts in 5th grade, that would be another one. So maybe those are the direct student services I'm going to do. And then I'm also going to address the maybe some classroom management PD for our teachers. So that's an indirect student service, because it's not face-to-face with students, but it's definitely going to indirectly help them. So I might write in that other side of that box, PD on classroom management for teachers. Or even if you don't provide that, but if you're going to make the recommendation to your principal, you can still write that in there, because you're still using your data and what you've collected to make recommendations to address this goal. So even if your principal decides to bring in someone else, still go ahead and include it there. The other indirect student service I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a parent meeting with the students who had the most discipline referrals early on in the school year, just as a let's chat about how we're going to make this a great year before any issues happen. I always love the more I could get parents in preventatively and in a positive manner. And if you don't want to bring them in for that, you could at least make a phone call. So maybe my indirect student service would be positive phone calls home to the 10 students who had the most behavior referrals in 4th grade. All right, so those might be the indirect student services. There are many, many more we could list. We might collaborate with the teachers about how to set up their classroom to be more effective. We might make a referral to outside services. All of those would be indirect student services. But this section of this document is really important because, again, we can't expect to meet our goal if we're not thinking through what we're going to do to address it. It's a minimum of 2 on each of those, but most likely you'll do more than that. Anything you do that's related to it, you can add that here. This can be ongoing too. If you run that small group and you do that classroom lesson, and then you decide that maybe doing check-in, check-out with some of these students would be helpful as well, add it to the list, right? This isn't a set in stone document. It can be a living document. All right. So those are the components I really, really encourage you to start with if that's where you want to start. But the entire document is really important. It walks you through not only the goal writing and the supplemental data collection that we already talked about. The next page, page 2, starts looking at systemic issues, which is really important. We talked about that in the data training, where some of these problems are not student issues. They might be due to bigger systemic issues that we can address, right? If you're having a lot of bus referrals, what bigger problems are happening? Are the students being monitored by a teacher? You know, what all is going on? And this systemic issues part of page 2 is really helpful. Then we also get into the student standards part. So we want to align our student standards with our annual student outcome goals. And we want to write learning objectives, because what our annual student outcome goals tell us is something that our students are missing, right? My 5th grade students that have fighting and discipline referrals are missing a skill. So I've got to figure out what student standards I'm going to address to help build that skill, and what learning objectives I need to create so that my students gain that skill that they're missing. And a pre and post test really helps us identify all of that as well. Now, if those sections are overwhelming, pause on those and just start with the other pieces. But know that all of them are really, really important to the overall success of our annual student outcome goals. All right. Also, just as a note, that data-driven summer series I keep referring to, there's a lot of overlap because all of this is about implementation of our framework. But I really spend a lot of time talking about the annual student outcome goal plan in that training, and we really go through each of those sections in even more depth. So again, I'll send those links to you and you can check that out and learn even more. Just like with those annual student goal statements, if you want to send the whole plan to me and let me look over it, please do. I am more than happy to give feedback and help you continue to strengthen that support and that plan that you're putting in place. All right, so with that, we are wrapping up our session on this annual student goals and how we can use these to really strengthen our back to school and our school year this year. Just to make sure you're aware, we have some more upcoming training and events. Part 3, as I mentioned, is next week at 3 o'clock. So I hope you all come back and join us for our final session. Also, we're doing our monthly coffee with counselors. We had a great turnout earlier this week, so I hope that you are able to join us if you haven't already. We'll also be offering some more webinars coming up, so be on the lookout for that. We do have an OSDE Connect course with a lot of great resources, and you'll have information about how to learn more. I've mentioned I would send you this. This is that data-driven summer series that you can check out, all on YouTube and easy to watch in your free time. And also that session 1 of this series about calendars is linked there. I'll send this slide deck in my follow-up email following our time together, so you can get all of these resources. They're pre-recorded webinars here you can access, and of course, so many books and different resources that you can find here as well. So all the learning you could ever want to do is available to you. So as we close out, our optimistic closure for today is just asking you to reflect on everything we've talked about today and think about what your next right thing could be. So maybe that's to continue working on your annual student outcome goal, or maybe you're going to try to do that all 3 pages of the goal plan. But whatever your next right thing is, think about it, maybe even jot it down on a sticky note to remind yourself of that next right thing, and remind yourself tomorrow morning, because I hope you're all going home and getting some much needed rest now. But think about that next right thing as we close out today. And as we always say, that we just do the best we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we do better. And that's why we're here, to continue to do better. So thank you for prioritizing your growth and your comprehensive school counseling program. And we will see you next time for part 3. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.